real.
So y'all know that we're streaming live on, so we have to wait.
The peanut's neither a pea nor a nut.
Right.
Discuss.
Discuss.
It's on Facebook Live.
Thank you so much for braving the 59 degrees February to come out tonight. I wasn't ready. You should tell me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, Bruce would like to get his best side.
We are going live.
Oh, we're going live.
Yeah, it's
we're
starting
live.
now.
We're sorry.
Yes. It's okay. There'll be plenty of time for pictures and cookies later. How are you feeling? Ready?
We're ready.
We're ready.
Fun. Let's do it.
We are.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you for coming to this very important talk. We're going to have a nice discussion for the next hour. And I'm joined up here by the CEO and president for For All Seasons, Beth Ann Langro. And she's partnered with Lisa Lee, the chief clinical officer for All Seasons. And I'm Bruce. I'll be the MC tonight. I'm not that important. I'm just here to ask some questions. But we want to give a special thank out to QAC TV. It's Queens County Television. That's who I work with. And an even specialer thank you to MC TV and the Avalon for hosting this wonderful talk tonight. And then we also want to throw out a very big special thank you to the Women and Girls Fund, who partnered with For All Seasons to bring this presentation to the community and to everyone that is sitting with us today and people sitting at home watching, which is exciting.
Hi, everyone at home.
Hi, everyone at home. Tonight we're going to be talking about a really important topic that affects all of our lives. I know it affects me daily, and that's anxiety. But before we get into that discussion, I think it's important to understand why we're talking about this. So we have a couple of slides we're going to go through. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health concern in the United States. Teen girls suffer from anxiety disorders more than any other group. The National Institute for Mental Health's findings showed that 38% of female adolescents suffer from an anxiety disorder versus 26% for male adolescents. A report from August 2021 from the Morgan Stanley Alliance for Children's Mental Health showed how the pandemic has impacted all teens, with a 48% of teens surveyed expressing concerns about social anxiety. During February and March of 2021, hospital visits for teen girls for suspected suicide attempts, including those for actual attempts, as well as non-suicidal self-harm injuries, jumped 51% compared to the same period in 2019. Among boys aged 12 to 17 years, suspected suicide attempt and emergency department visits increased 3.7%. So obviously we can all see there are many problems. But we're here tonight with everyone to gather and better understand this topic and talk about what we can do. So can you share what we're going to accomplish together tonight, ladies?
Yeah, so I just want to first say thank you again to everybody for coming out. And for those of you at home and enjoying your cup of coffee or your tea while we have this discussion, you know, for us, Bruce, this has really become a topic that is a daily conversation. And if we've learned nothing through the pandemic, we've learned that everyone has experienced something different, that we have all, every single one of us in this room, those of you at home, we've all experienced a different feeling or a mental health symptom. And so what we really want to do tonight is bring a voice and bring a conversation to the table about anxiety. We want to talk about what it is, how it affects us. You know, this has been a program that was really made possible with a grant that we received through the Women and Girls Fund, and we are so grateful to Women and Girls Fund for being able to say, hey, this is an important topic. But we also want to bring some space and some acknowledgement that if there are teen girls in your lives, there's inevitably teen boys. And so while our campaign is focused on teen girls, we also are going to talk about things that affect me, that affect you, that affect all of us, regardless of age and regardless of gender.
Mm-hmm. And my hope really is that when we have this conversation, that we can take one or two nuggets that resonate with you all, that you can use in your life, or at least know wow, maybe it's not me, maybe it's just not me. So for me, it's really about hoping also that people can take a nugget or two out of here and use that in their lives as they move on.
Yeah. And I think the other thing for all of us tonight is that we have some teen girls in the audience, and there are, I'm sure, are some at home watching. We want you to hear from us that it's okay to be feeling whatever you're feeling, and it's okay to reach out for help. You know, a large part of what our agency has been doing over the pandemic and throughout the entirety of the agency's existence is bringing to the attention of people that it's okay not to be okay, and really giving some of those skills and tools to be able to say, I'm not okay, or checking in on friends who might be giving off a different vibe than you're used to and trying to figure out how to talk through that, knowing that you don't have to have the answers and the solutions, but we want to create the conversation.
Right. And as we're getting into this, I think it's important that we start small.
Absolutely.
So could we just ask, what is anxiety? Maybe we don't even know that we're feeling it. Maybe as mental health professionals, you could help us understand this.
Yeah, so anxiety in the simplest terms that I would say is an internal feeling of worry or dread or fear. And what I did was I reached out to some little people around and got some definitions, because I thought, well, you know, we can look at Webster's dictionary, we can look at what the American Psychological Association says. What I would like for you to think about as I read some of this is, can you resonate with this? Does this land for you? So when I asked, and this is age ranges from 9 all the way up to young adulthood, it's a feeling of being trapped with no way out. It can feel like you can't breathe and there's a lot of pressure on your chest. When you have a fear of something, you're shy or scared. You're stressed or worried, afraid, scared of a lot of things, overly worried about situations and cannot control the thoughts, worked up about a situation and need a lot of reassurance. So for me, when I hear that, I think about we all have something in common. For me, anxiety is on a spectrum, so something maybe mild that provokes a little bit of anxiety in our system, to something that can get very extreme, like a generalized anxiety disorder or a post-traumatic stress. And so one of the things that we want to keep in mind today is that anxiety is on a spectrum.
And obviously, we're all snowflakes. We're all very different.
Absolutely.
But how does anxiety show up? And I guess more importantly now tonight, in adolescents and teens, like what does anxiety look like? What should we be looking for?
So it shows up in really different ways, and no one is going to be able to say, well, that's not how it happens for me, so maybe it's not real. And I think one of the things that's important as we talk through this is that it is not only a physical reaction, but it's also a chemical reaction in our bodies. So when we're talking about anxiety, it's important to realize that it isn't something that people are making up. But it might show up for some as, I have a stomach ache. I don't feel good. It may show up for some people where they shut down. It might just be that they can't have a conversation because they don't know what to say, or they are steeped in that fear. For other people, it might be that their heart starts to race, or that they get sweaty, or they have sweaty palms. And for other people, it might cause a reaction of anger. It might cause a reaction of sadness. And so it's really important, as Lisa talks about anxiety being on that spectrum, the reactions and how anxiety presents itself can be different for everyone.
And one of the things that keep in mind, especially Beth Ann, when you talk about fear, there's actually a part in our brain called the amygdala, and that part of our brain actually is our fear center. And so the physiological reactions that Beth Ann described with the sweaty palms or the heart racing is something that happens when we're anxious or when we have anxiety. And so it's important for all of us to keep in mind that when we're thinking about anxiety, it isn't something that we're just saying, well, there's, something happening. There really is in our body because our brains are being activated. And something that's also really important to think about is the part of brain. So we have this part of our brain, that's our thinking brain, and then we have our emotional brain. And so our thinking brain maybe causes us to have thoughts. So when we talk about how does it show up, for girls it might be a thought of, I'm not good enough, I'm not pretty enough. For boys it might be, I'm not strong enough. So those are the things to keep in mind when we're thinking about the thought might be in the front part of our brain. The reaction, so the sweaty palms or the heart beating, might be more related to the part of the brain that gets activated. It's really important to know that as we go on, because we'll talk about different ways that we can work with the thoughts and then the feelings in our body.
And this feels like something that we're finally discussing out in the open. So maybe, and we're erasing stigma daily, and we're making leaps. And what we know about anxiety, it's been around forever, but what is different about today? What are some of the key areas of teens' lives today that negatively impact their level of stress or anxiety?
You know, I think two words come to mind right away: social media. You know, when I think about how we all grew up collectively, and those in this room who didn't grow up in the last 10 to 15 years, you know, social media didn't exist, and so there wasn't this how many likes do you have, or how many posts came on after you put something on social media. And the other piece that I think is also really important when it comes to any of the information online, there wasn't as many streaming devices, so there wasn't, you know, I did not grow up as a young girl seeing a million different fashion things and seeing all of the people, the way that you're supposed to dress, the way that you're supposed to look. You know, while there might have been some of that, our teen girls are inundated with what you're supposed to look like, how you're supposed to dress, how you're supposed to act, and there is such pressure to be that perfect self that sometimes the anxiety comes from, you know, as Lisa said, am I good enough? Am I skinny enough? Am I in the right group of people? And I think for all of us, we can resonate with the understanding that sometimes it's the conversations that are taking place on the Snapchats and the Facebook and Twitter and all of these places where it's a lot easier in this day and age to be nasty and mean through text messaging and through the computer than it is to be having a conversation with people. And so a lot of the anxiety that we hear about when we're in the community and doing these presentations stems from that ease of, it's so easy to fly off a nasty comment to somebody on text message or on Facebook and not have to hold responsibility for it afterwards, but then not consider what that does to the person who's in the receiving end.
I think another thing for difference from back when we grew up versus where it is now.
But we're not old. We're going to put that out there. We're not old.
I'm old.
But like young girls are changing a lot sooner than we did. Puberty is hitting at a different age, and so bodies are changing a little bit differently. And going off of the social media or the comparison, that's what my big concern would be, is how do we judge ourselves with other young ladies, or, you know, self-confidence? How do we judge ourselves with, you know, our classmates or the other, you know, our athletes? And so for me, comparison is such a strong anxiety-producing factor that we have to really consider, I think.
Yeah, and I would say that one of the other components is managing the expectation and managing the expectations of those around you. And so being able to, you know, get to the place where maybe there's parental expectations, maybe there's sibling expectations, maybe it's maybe there is a parent who is struggling with anxiety and it then spills over. And so being able to be in a space where if you as a parent, or if you as a caregiver or an aunt, an uncle, a grandparent, if you're not in a good space and you yourself are struggling with anxiety, maybe sometimes it's the reaction that you are getting from your child because of where you are. And so, you know, as we talk about the stigma, the issues of mental health, we certainly have a long way to go in terms of breaking down the walls of stigma. We've made a lot of strides. You know, we've both been doing this work for 20 to 25 years. It's way different than it was, but we have to continue to have the conversation, and we have to give permission to our girls to get it wrong without there being shame and guilt and blame that comes along with that.
And I know, I'm just going to throw out, I can't stand how social media follows our kids home.
Oh, yeah.
It's, you know, if you're getting bullied at school, then it's following you on social media. It's just so hard, and I feel so bad for kids that now don't get to escape because of social media. So, and just a tag on, we're talking about generations. Do we see a very different way the generations are looking at, you know, anxiety now? Like, as far as, you know. my parents, I don't even think they knew what the word anxiety was.
Right. Yeah. And so that's an interesting question, Bruce, because as we were looking at research and as we were talking about the presentation, one of the things that came up is that the chemical makeup of females holds anxiety different than males. So no different than there's a chemical in your body that men process alcohol differently. Women process stress and emotion and anxiety different than boys do from the pure chemical makeup of our bodies. What I think is different now is that there was a tendency to say, like, oh, you're so drama-filled, or oh, you're overreacting. And I think it's really important, and one of the things that I said to Lisa was really important to drive the point home tonight, that we need to pay attention to the reaction of our young people and not dismiss it as it's just dramatic, or it's an overreaction, or you're just whining because. It's really important to have the conversation and be able to give space so that our young people can have that conversation. And maybe parents or caregivers and siblings, community don't know what's happening, but to be able to say, I'm having anxiety or I'm having stress, because they're not always going to use the word anxiety.
Right.
It might show up different, and we need to pay attention to that language.
For me, I appreciate that question, because I have the privilege of working with so many people, men and women, and young people and older people. And when I'm working with the women, I hear this constant theme of, when I grew up, I was told I'm too dramatic, I'm too emotional, I'm too this. And it really damaged their outlook or their self-view. And what I would invite everyone to think about is, how do we communicate that it's okay to feel your feels? That's my language, you feel your feels. And so how do you feel your feelings, and how can we hold that space for people to do that? Because I will tell you, and I appreciate so much that you bring that up, to drive home the point, by saying you're being dramatic, you're being over emotional, it really has an impact on the way that we look at ourselves.
And it silences the potential for a conversation. I think that's another really big point, is that the language that we use and the sort of pathway to support can either open up that door for a conversation and make somebody feel safe enough to come back and say the next time, remember what happened last week, it's happening again. If the response that a child receives is, you're being overdramatic, that will shut that child down to a point where you're now not that safe space that they can come and land without judgment to be able to say, here's how I'm feeling.
And then to that, what happens is we internalize those behaviors, or we internalize those feelings. And, if somebody doesn't have the coping skills that they need to get through that, that's where we can get to some dangerous coping skills. And so I think it's really important for us to keep in mind that keeping that conversation open is going to be key to helping our young people to work with their anxiety. And like you said, they might not label it as anxiety. I love that.
Yeah.
And my daughter came home from school one day, and she had like the worst day. And she was telling me something that happened. I was like, yeah, I went through that. She was like, what? She was just so amazed that, it happens to a lot of people. It wasn't just me.
Yeah.
So we're going to go through some messages. I know as part of a campaign for our For All Seasons, the team shared key messages and tips to help teens and caregivers. So we're going to take a look at the screen at some of these messages and find out about ways that we can help. So our first message, when anxiety appears, ask yourself why. Can you tell us more?
Sure. Do you ever find yourself in this space where you can feel sort of your grounding is lost, and you're starting to get whatever feeling you have when you know that you're walking down the road of stress or anxiety? How often do we take the time to sort of sit and pause and do what we say to kids, count to 5? And, I can tell you, as a parent who was having to work from home during the pandemic, like so many, I'm a single parent with 2 boys at home. They were homeschooling. I was working at home. And I was not at my best as a mom some days. There was more yelling than there had ever been in our house. And there was a lot going on in managing. And my children had the permission to put me in timeout, and I had the permission to put them in timeout. And a lot of it came back to, we learned that skill of, when we could feel ourselves amping up, pausing and counting to 5 and saying, why is this happening? What's going on? And just the ability, to be able to ground yourself and really discover, what's this about, and how can I move through this without continuing to walk down a path of it getting worse before it gets better?
So I'll give a little bit of a personal example. So we were getting prepared for this talk, and I was saying to Beth Ann, I was like, I'm really nervous. And she's like, oh, I'm not me. This is no problem at all. I was like, how does that happen? So the why is, what if I make a mistake? What if I don't say the right things? What if I'm not enough? Now, I can manage that because I can look into that, but that's what that's about, is what's happening underneath there, right, so that I can use the right part of my brain and or get the support that I need in order to make that right. Or tell myself, wait a minute, you're prepared, you've got notes all over the table up here, you've got your whoopee, which I call my hot cup of tea that calms me, we've got a moderator. And so if we can identify what's the underneath, that's really helpful in understanding how can we work with the anxiety.
And part of what is so important about an event like tonight and the conversations that can be spurred from this is that if we can think about how we can do that, when we get to the moment that it's happening, we're better prepared because we've sort of skilled up and we've tooled up to be able to say, oh, right, we talked about this. I need to take that step back. I need to think about what's happening for me. Where are these feelings? We're not going to get it right every time. It's not a perfect world. But if we can answer that question of why and think it through when we are not in the midst of anxiety creeping in, it will help us be better prepared once it's happening.
And one of the things that I want to make sure that we acknowledge too is a lot of times I'll hear, like in my own personal life, I'm scared of the bridge. You're not scared of the bridge. And here's the thing, as a parent, for those of you out there who are parents or listening or, maybe even helping other young people, the reason for me that I use the word drill it down, that I try to funnel that a little bit is because I don't want that person to be afraid of bridges. They're not afraid of the bridges. They're afraid of what's going to happen. And so again, in understanding that, we can better help that person to figure out and how to understand what's really happening with them.
You have a great storm analogy in your notes. I'll read it. This isn't me. I'm not this smart. But in your notes you wrote, you can't stop a storm. You have to wait it out, but the brain will reset.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful.
And it's so true because we sometimes have to weather that storm in order for us to be able to look back and say, what happened? And be able to say, and what's next?
Yeah, and it's hard, but let's acknowledge that because it's hard to weather the storm and sit in that place of my heart's beating really fast, my thoughts are going a lot. And so weathering the storm can be really challenging, but the really important takeaway is it will pass.
Yes, yeah.
It will pass. And so it's practicing that passing.
Mm-hmm. And I think, sometimes you figure out what happens at the end of that storm when it's passed. We just had a conversation before we came up here tonight. It was a really busy day, and I said to Lisa and to Lauren, I was sitting at the Route 50 stoplight, and I thought, okay, let's walk through the day. And my takeaway was, here's the things that we could have done a little bit differently, or here's the things that impacted me. But at the end of my takeaway was, I was so grateful for my team. And so sometimes when that storm passes, you can take those little nuggets that Lisa's talking about and be able to then find a really, somebody said to me earlier this week, Lisa and I were recording our podcast earlier tonight, and somebody said to me, there's no mistakes, only opportunities. And so sometimes we look at it like you've weathered that storm. There might be something that you would have done differently, but what's the opportunity for growth that comes at the end of the storm?
Yeah, that's why I've made so many mistakes. Thank you. Are we ready to move on to our next message?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Our next slide. I am not my anxiety. So what does that mean?
So we do a lot of work with Brene Brown's research. Lisa and I are both Dare to Lead facilitators, and I am not my anxiety really resonates through when we talk about the difference between shame and guilt. And shame being I am bad and the self-message that we may give to ourselves versus guilt, which is I've done something that makes me feel bad. And so, anxiety is a piece of who you are. It doesn't define you. We always say in the mental health world, like our job is to help you find your best self, but not allowing yourself to get into the talk of I'm bad because of my anxiety, or my anxiety is all that I am, and here's the things that I can't change. It's really about the journey and the path to finding your best self when it comes to who defines you as you. Your very best person might have anxiety as a component, but it doesn't mean that you are anxiety and everything else falls away.
So I'm going to offer an invitation, and the invitation is for you to consider this. That we're all born into this world amazing. It's my belief, it doesn't have to be your belief. And that sometimes in life, whether it's our biology, so maybe we're a little bit more prone to anxiety or a little bit more sensitive to uncertainty, whether it's events that happen in our life, sometimes we create parts. And so there's a part of me that maybe feels anxious. It's not who I am. Who I am is good to the core. But that part of me has information. And so I would invite you to listen to that information, to listen to that message, to listen to the feeling, because it has a story to tell you. And so, I am not my anxiety. No, there's a part of me that has anxiety. I'd invite you to think about getting close to that, to understanding that, to knowing that, because I really believe that that gives you valuable information about what's happening in your life. So for me, that's what I think about when anxiety is not who I am, but that's just a part of who I am.
And once you get close to that information, you can then do something with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for me personally, the scary word COVID lately taught me a lot about myself, and that I have some anxiety I didn't even realize I had. And in the past 2 years, I've been trying to find a way to deal with it myself, and letting it not take control, because it's easy to happen.
Sure.
Yeah.
And even just being able to give it a name, or to give it its own
Steve.
You want to call it Steve?
Yeah.
You can call it Steve. But being able to say, like, oh, so when this is happening, and maybe some of you here tonight, or maybe some of you at home, can't resonate with this yet, but maybe tomorrow something's going to happen, and you're going to go back to, oh, right, Lisa gave the invitation last night for me to pay attention to this. Because sometimes it's just identifying it to be able to understand that it doesn't define you.
Wonderful. Next message?
Absolutely.
All right, next slide.
You're in charge.
Oh, well. Mindfulness helps to reduce anxiety. So what is mindfulness, and how does it work?
So mindfulness is a present moment experience. And so what is happening to me right here and right now? And I know a lot of people think, well, mindfulness, there's so much, it's kind of silly stuff. I will tell you that, so when we talk about differences from, back when I grew up versus now, I really believe that right now we have a movement towards mindfulness versus I don't remember hearing much about it when I was
I don't
growing
think
up.
the word existed when we grew up.
Even when I was in school, I mean, it's such an important tool. Even when I was in school, I don't remember many discussions, whereas I see, newer clinicians coming out with such a great ability to be mindful. But it's really being in the present moment and feeling or noticing in that moment. So that's, for me, the definition of mindfulness. I don't know. What do you have?
No, I think absolutely. And being aware of what you need. There's also that piece too of, in that moment, what is it that you need, which kind of goes back to sometimes if we can think these things through, being mindful in that space when it's happening.
You guys know the character counts in schools?
Yes.
They have trustworthiness. And
Yeah.
we need to get mindfulness in there.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll add a seventh one.
Well,
talk
I
to
will
the
tell you,
schools.
some of the schools really are starting to bring mindfulness. And I use the word amygdala because my son, who's in 5th grade, that's what they're learning.
Right.
I was like, would you remember that? Because I was talking to him. I'm like, so what's anxiety to you, buddy? And so he says it. And I said, did you know that there's a part of the brain? He's like, the amygdala. I'm like, well, how about that? That's fantastic. Yeah, so they're learning a little bit about mindfulness and how that stuff gets impacted.
And so if it's good for managing anxiety, are there practices? How can I be mindful at home? Is there something I can do?
Yeah, and so I think there's lots of things that you can do to find a way to ground yourself. And again, it's going to be on that spectrum. And so, maybe it's being aware that you need that first 5 minutes in the morning where there's nobody around, and you need that cup of coffee to be able to sort of think through your day. Maybe for you, it's a cup of tea at night because you need to think through the day that's already happened. And some people may journal, some people may do a gratitude thing with the kids at the end of the day. It might be a phone call to a friend, So I think it's about, in that moment, recognizing what you need and what will ground you to be able to give you a little bit of self-care, because that's the piece of mindfulness that's so important. We get so busy and we get so focused on helping everybody else, but the mindfulness pulls you back to what you need, and it's okay to spend some time doing that.
I think slowing down and being present is something we could all use, whether it's because of anxiety or because of just daily life. So slowing down, pausing, and really just checking in is going to be an important strategy, I think, for anybody that they can use. One of the things that I really want to honor is everyone does it differently, and it changes. So when Beth Ann was talking about how maybe it's a cup of coffee in the morning, or maybe it's a something. For me, it used to be, I'm going to get up, I'm going to work out, and then I'm going to have my coffee, and I'm going to do this. And what I realize is I need to change that routine up because something's not working. So what you might find is something that was working really well, you might have to tweak a little bit. And that's okay. That's what this is all about, is learning and experimenting with what's going to work well for you.
And one of the things we talked about in one of our podcasts towards the beginning of the year was not taking on too much to change too much all at once. And so we talked about New Year's resolutions and how so often people have these grand New Year's resolutions and they're hard to maintain, and really taking the time to think through making one change at a time and giving yourself the permission to start and reset if it doesn't work the first time. So, maybe you're going to try to incorporate journaling at the end of the day, and you are really great for 6 days, and you get to your 7th day and you forget. We could have the tendency to say, well, that's it, I screwed it up. It's okay to start again. It's okay that we reset, but giving yourself some attainable goals as you're trying to make those shifts so that it doesn't become so overwhelming that you're trying to change everything at once, and then you're just more anxiety-ridden because you didn't get it right. So really thinking that through.
Yeah, and knowing, again, I want to drive home the point that knowing that it's going to be different for everybody. I have some folks that I work with, and they'll say, someone will tell me just take deep breaths, or go exercise, and it doesn't work for them. That's not their thing, and it actually kind of increases their level of anxiety. And so for some people, what I've learned is that just sitting and feeling the chair, or your back on the chair, or feeling the earth, that's going to be the most important. And it allows them access to take that breath. Because sometimes, again, if we're in our emotional brain, we don't have access to using some skills, especially with our thinking. And so finding that mindfulness will help you to access the strongest part of your brain so that you can reset.
I'll tell you right now, we're going to open up a new cafe called Mindfulness Cafe.
There you go.
The Mindfulness Cafe.
We'll see you there every Friday night.
Yes.
All right, we're going to move on to our next message. And this one, man, it's going to be my biggest problem, I can already tell. And it's social media.
Yeah.
Social media can stir up anxiety. We've been hearing about it. We even talked about it earlier tonight. But in the news, there are some serious issues with social media and our young people. Why does social media stir up anxiety?
There's that piece of our society right now where everything has to happen now. There's not the sort of thought that things can take some time, or that we need to pause. Everything needs to happen yesterday, and social media gives you that instant gratification. And so one of the things that I think, as we think about social media and anxiety, it's really important to think through, how is it affecting the young people? And maybe even how is it affecting you? I know I have that little thing on my phone at the end of the week that says you spent X percentage of hours on the phone. But it's really important when we're talking about anxiety to factor social media, if that's a part of your young person's life, into a piece of the puzzle. Because maybe it's going to have to be limiting the time on the phone. Maybe it's limiting the time on the Xbox for folks that might have Xboxes or PlayStations at home. So there's a component where we really need to be talking with our children about how much time. It's also about what type of activity is happening on those social media devices, and ensuring, kids are on screens so much more than they were even 2 years ago. And then the other piece of it that I think is really important that we've learned through the pandemic is to not dismiss that social media and our electronics that our kids have can also be an avenue to connection. Because through the pandemic, that was the only way that kids could connect. If they couldn't be in school together and sports were canceled and life had shifted, it's important that we don't forget that in the world of anxiety, it might be caused because there's not that ability to connect as easily. So really being able to sort of have those conversations, and I mean, social media has its place. You know, there is great things about being on social media. You all have to make that determination at what age. You know, my 12-year-old son thinks that I'm the meanest mom in the world because he is not allowed to have Snapchat or Facebook or any of that. And I said to him, check in with me when you're 18. He's like, 18, Mom, everybody's on it. Fantastic. But, you know, I think it's really important to set the boundaries that work for you as a family. And again, going back to Lisa's point, it's going to be different for everybody. But there are really some benefits, and there's some cautionary things about how social media impacts anxiety.
Absolutely. So, invitation number 2. I'll give you lots of invitations. Invitation number 2. So, I'm going to just say a couple words and just kind of notice your initial self-talk, whatever kind of comes up in your mind. So, what if you got off of all social media? I can't tell if she's like, holy cow, I can't imagine that. Or,
how dare you?
I know, but I mean, but think about that. I can tell you that many people are probably thinking, no way, I can't get off of social media. You know, that's how I stay connected. And again, there are some really important pieces of that, because, you know, when my kids, the neighbors are sick or we can't play, you know, they might get on just to FaceTime, or if they're on vacation, there's some great things about it. Or if we have family that lives far away, there's some great things about social media. But if it is impacting our life in a way that is causing a lot of anxiety, as grown-ups, how do we limit that for our children, knowing that it's going to be a hard conversation? Because I can tell you, my boys, they don't like to get off of electronics. They really enjoy that time. But so how much do we push as parents? And then, again, the invitation of what would it be like? Let's bite-size it. Even if you reduced it half. Maybe it didn't get totally off. So it's an invitation to try and experiment. How would your life be different? How would things change for you if you reduced it?
And I think going along those lines, it's also paying attention to when social media and or when electronics come in, if there's a specific thing that gets your child feeling different. So, you know I've heard some adults through the pandemic say, I can't read the news in the morning anymore because it just sets me off in a really bad place. So I either have to not do it at all, or I have to do it in the evening. And so I think it goes back to that trial and error piece too, and being able to pay attention to when there are situations where a child is maybe more amped up on a certain site, or because they're having a certain conversation, really sort of tracking that with your child too, and having those open conversations of like, so what were you watching on YouTube, or what were you seeing on this social media site, to be able to say, well, you know what I've noticed over the week is that when you're watching X, Y, and Z, you seem to have a more difficult night. So let's limit that after 5 o'clock, or, sort of setting some of those boundaries.
Mm-hmm. So before we move off of social media, can we talk about some of the things that maybe social media does that affects our anxiety, and I guess more importantly, it affects our adolescents' anxiety at home? So the like button, right? We're all chasing the like, and like highlight reels, and people are chasing the best image of what they're seeing. Can we talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'm not on social media, and
She's
so
not.
it's funny because it's hard to understand that place where it's like, I want to see, how many people are following me, or I hear my friends and their daughters saying, when we have conversations about, well, look at all these images that are up on Facebook, and it looks like the perfect family, or she looks so good, or there's always smiles. So that's the part that I think can be really tricky, is navigating what it looks like when it might not be the reality.
Yeah.
And I think that is so important. The ability to be able to put something out and make it look really great. You know, when we talk about this all the time, that there's times where folks have a smile on their face and they might be struggling, but they just, I'm fine, I'm good, I don't need anybody's help. It's really important to help our kids understand that perception and reality can be two different things on social media, for sure. And I think those likes go back to that instant gratification. We are in a culture right now where we need gratification right away. And so those likes can be something that are chased. But the important piece of it is recognizing for our young people that not having a lot of likes doesn't shift your self-worth. It just shifts that number on the screen. And really being able to drive home that they are good through and through. You know, like Lisa says, you are born amazing and you are good to the core. And that is someone else's perception of something that you've put up on a social media platform.
Yeah. Take a picture because you were happy, smiling, and
right.
That should be it.
That's it.
You know, like it, cool.
Cool.
Not,
then it's exactly, yeah.
There's actually, I don't want to get off topic. Very famous TikTok. If you don't know,
we're not on TikTok in my house, bros.
There's a young boy and he's at a hockey game with his girlfriend. His girlfriend's taking a picture, and his hockey team is getting demolished. For a split second, she takes it, holds up the camera, he turns and he smiles. They take a picture. So sad, he's about to cry. So it's important that the images that someone saw of him that night, said
right.
what he was feeling about that evening.
Yeah.
You're seeing the best of someone.
Absolutely.
That they want to post.
Yes. Yep. So true.
And again, before we move on, can we shift the narrative a little? Can we talk about maybe a positive way we could use social media?
Yeah, you know, I think some of the ways that I know that we use it in our family and lots of friends have used it, it's a wonderful tool, like Lisa said, to keep people connected that are far away. I think there are great messages, you know. I know that I'm really mindful about putting different things on Facebook when there are opportunities to maybe think about something differently or to be able to spread the word about even a program like tonight. I mean, you all are here because we plastered this thing on social media. And so there are really great benefits to being able to connect community and to connect message. The key is making sure that we're being thoughtful about what we're putting on social media and ensuring that we are leading with our best when we are posting and being able to really share the good things in life, but keep that reality that everything on social media is not always as it appears. Because just because you saw it on a YouTube clip doesn't make it true, as I tell my 10-year-old.
Right.
Yeah.
In our notes, we have a mention about a video. I apologize. We're not showing a video, though.
No, we are not.
But do we want to make sure that they have a link to get to the video?
Yeah, so there's some great videos. We have a web page that we've created. The Let's Talk About It campaign has its own page on the For All Seasons web page. And one of our associate clinical directors, Emily Moody, has done some great videos talking about how anxiety shows up and how the brain works. So we would really encourage you to visit that website. We'll make sure to post it on our Facebook page, and we'll throw it in as a link underneath tonight's Facebook Live. But certainly, you know, one of the beautiful things about having such a great and talented staff is that we've started to do some of these 5-minute videos where you can just garnish a little bit of information and learn a little bit about a subject. And certainly on this anxiety website page, there's lots of resources that we've posted, and there's a lot more information that you can continue to open those conversations with folks. Emily used to work in the Talbot County Public Schools. She's so talented in what she's done, and so even some of your students might recognize her, and it's kind of cool to see somebody on a Facebook page on a video and all that good thing. So we encourage you to go to those links.
Excellent. Now we're going to go on to our last message, and soon we're going to open it up if there's any questions in the audience and questions if you're watching at home. So if you have a question, throw it in the Facebook chat, or if you have a question in the room, start thinking about it, and we'll come up to those soon. But our last message. Self-care is not selfish. We hear a lot about self-care, and I think most people kind of shrug it off and think it's about chocolates and bubble baths, or maybe a massage.
Well, it could be.
Bonbons.
It could be.
Well, tell us more.
So, you know, the piece about self-care that we continue to really focus in on is that it's okay to take care of yourself and put yourself first and not have to feel guilty about not putting others first. And I can certainly, I'll say this to the moms in the room because there's lots of us here. You know, there's a level of forgetting about ourselves as moms, as you're running from sporting event to, this event at school and that event at school, and working and making sure that all plates are in the air and spinning in the same direction. And I don't know about all of you, but I certainly have moments where I feel guilty if I take an hour out for myself and have the kids sit on their electronics because I need that reset time. But, I say all the time, I lived in Japan for a while, and what I learned while living there was that they played really hard during the week, and they worked really hard during the week, and they played really hard on the weekend. What I've learned through COVID and what we've collectively learned as leaders of an organization is that self-care is not something that can be saved for the weekend. Self-care is something that we have to give ourselves every day, because in order to sustain our very best selves, we have to take care of us, and we have to be okay accepting people's help. We have to be okay giving help to others, but it can't be something that we continue to put off, because by the time you get to self-care on the weekend, I don't know about all of you, but I'm so exhausted that I can't even think about self-care in the way that I would have on Monday morning. And so just that permission to be able to give ourselves what we need, it goes back to sort of the mindfulness of anxiety, and being able to say, in order for my day to start off well. I was talking with a high school student last week, and she said, I have a horrible day when I'm running late, and I can't seem to get my dad out the door in time. I was giving a presentation at a school, and she said, when my dad's running late and I'm running late to school, I have a horrible day. And so we had a conversation about, okay, so let's enlist your dad in this conversation versus getting angry with him. Let's talk about how it makes you feel and what you need to have a good day in school. And I think those are some of the things we have to pay attention to. She was able, at the age of 17, to say, this is the self-care that I need. I need to be in the car 10 minutes earlier.
Invitation number 3. So this is really me speaking in particular to the parents and maybe biasly, maybe more to moms. So I'll put that out there. My invitation to you moms in particular is model for your daughters what it is to take care of yourself. God, I could feel that. Like, that's so important. I will say my mother is amazing, and she does it all. And I learned you can go and go and go. What I had to learn was to pause, to slow down. And so I am inviting, in particular moms, but this is really an invitation open to anybody, to slow down, take care of yourself, because you don't know who's watching you. Sisters, siblings that are older, your siblings are looking at you. Take care of yourself, speak to yourself well. I think that's really an important thing, is making sure that we're taking care of ourselves, because again, we don't know who's watching us.
And you just said, when you're thinking of yourself, one of the things that's so important in the self-care is think about the internal messages that you're giving to yourself during that self-care period. And so if you're hearing yourself speak negatively about you, think about, is that something that you would say to a friend? So if you've made a mistake and the internal message that you're giving to yourself is, I can't believe that I screwed up, I can't believe I did this wrong. If it was Lisa that was sitting next to me and said, I made that mistake, pausing and thinking, well, what would I say if Lisa had made the mistake? Because what I'd probably say to Lisa is, oh my gosh, it's totally fine, don't even worry about it. But sometimes that self-care requires us to roll back that internal message that we give to ourselves, because we're so much harder on ourselves than we are on our friends. And so that self-care also includes speaking to yourself like you would speak to a friend, and being kind to yourself is a really big part of that self-care.
And again, just remembering that self-care is different for everybody. For younger people, it might be, using a positive part of social media just to disconnect a little bit. Maybe it is, connecting with a friend in a different way. Maybe it's, having a cup of tea. Maybe it is bubble baths and chocolate.
And don't feel guilty if that's what you choose.
Right. But to remember that self-care is different for everybody. And my, fourth invitation would be to not judge that. And kind of walking back the conversation to mindfulness, an important component is the non-judgmental part of that. And so as Beth Ann talks about, how we talk to ourselves, it's non-judgmental. And so whatever we choose as a self-care option is to remember, this is okay for me.
Thank you so much for going through some of our messages. That was great. But now that we've gone through those, how do parents and caregivers know when it's time to seek help from professionals?
So I would say for me, it would be, again, if we're looking at that spectrum, that things are starting to be impacted in school or work life in a way that wasn't before, that you're noticing significant changes in behaviors or interactions, that maybe you're not doing activities, or that person yourself, your child is not doing activities that they usually did, but you're finding that they're pulling away. And that's the thing about anxiety that I would have you all be aware of, is that sometimes anxiety shuts us down and it causes us to pull in, and it makes it hard to connect. And so if you're noticing those changes over a period of time, that's when it's time to reach out. Again, we all experience anxiety. It's on a spectrum. I told you that, in preparation for this, I felt anxious. If that anxiety kept happening over and over, and it was impacting now my work and my ability to parent, that's when I would say, for me, would be a significant time to say, something's going on, I need to reach out and get some support.
And we're coming to the end of our time, so remember, get your questions ready. But before we get to questions, can you give us any final thoughts or takeaways that we should go home with this evening?
I think the first thing is just to simply have the conversation. This is not something I always say whenever I give a presentation, especially to the adolescent population. We're not going to lay on a couch and say, tell me all when it started. But if we invite the conversation, and if we start to have just those small conversations using questions like, help me understand how your day was, or using questions that don't end in a yes or a no. So maybe not, did you have a good day, but hey, so tell me about what happened in school today. What was the best thing that happened, and was there a part that was difficult? Giving the opportunity to start a conversation. And so often folks will say to me when I'm giving presentations and or to Lisa, you really want me to say, are you not doing okay, and or are you thinking of harming yourself? The answer is yes. You don't have to have the solution to the question that you're asking. We have a campaign that we did prior to this campaign that we run all the time, and it's the Ask, Listen, and Share campaign. And so part of what we hope that tonight will do is it will help you be able to start a conversation to ask the question, how are you doing? And so often we are busy in our lives, and we may not stick around to hear that full answer or to ask those open-ended questions. And really, truly listen. And if someone says to you, I'm not doing okay, or if your child says, I just feel like I can't do this anymore, that's where the resources come in. And that's the beauty of not having to have the solution. That's where our team and other agencies like ours in the community step in to be able to help in those moments when it does become life challenging.
And I would add to that to say, as a parent or somebody who hears that, it could be even, friends sharing with friends in school, because that happens a lot, is the first thing is just kind of check yourself. Go back to that mindfulness. What's happening for me as I hear this story? And as Beth Ann said, you don't have to have the answer. It could be simply, again, friend to friend, or parent to child, or uncle to, nephew or niece. It could just simply be, I don't know what to say other than, I'm so glad that you told me. Let's figure this out together. It doesn't have to be something, life-changing, other than a connection, which actually, quite frankly, is life-changing. It's, I'm sitting here, I'm paying attention, I'm hearing you, and let's see if we can figure this out together. So for me, I think that that's a big takeaway too, is to make sure that we're, connecting. The other thing is to use right brain to right brain. So if somebody comes to you and says, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm feeling all this, and the emotions and the energy is high, sit with them in that. That's not the time to problem solve. Yeah, it's feeling really big, and you're feeling really scared, or something's really upsetting you. When you can connect that way, then we can, as soon as the brain gets calmed, and as soon as that person gets calmed and is mindful, then we can figure out how to solve the problem. But if the emotions are high, connect with that moment, then bring back to this problem solving. So connect emotionally first, and then you can problem solve.
And I think along those lines, what's really important is recognizing if you're in the right space to be able to sit in that space and let that happen. And that's where we have our tribe. We have people, it might be that something has already triggered you as an individual and someone comes to you and brings you something. So you're already here and this person meets you here and you might have to say, I need help. Maybe it's another parent in the household, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's just saying, buddy, I am with you, I need 5 minutes, because you might need to be able to ground yourself before having that conversation. Because the one thing that we really want people to understand is that how we respond to anxiety can really make a difference. And so if we're so amped up because we're already in an anxious state, and then there's somebody who brings us anxiety, we need to be able to get ourselves in a regulated place to be able to do the very best for whoever's come our way.
Anxiety could be over. We've come to the end of our presentation. But we do want to answer some questions. If anyone has any questions out there, I know it's kind of bright. Yeah, of course. Could you walk
there
back
a microphone?
to our microphone in the back so we can hear your question?
Or bring it to her?
Or we can bring it up, whichever way. Just remember, if we don't have a lot of questions, you got to listen to me talk, and no one wants that.
I graduated high school like a year ago, and we had issues with like romanticization of mental illness as like OCD and anxiety and whatnot, like social anxiety, and like it was kind of like silencing for people who actually struggle with it. Not saying they didn't, but saying like flaunting it is kind of like makes you feel, oh, like I shouldn't share that because I don't want to come off as that. And like you guys mentioned a lot of like the classic symptoms of anxiety, but there are like really, really ugly ones that people don't really talk about, like dissociation and like selective mutism and stuff like that some of us struggle with. And like I think it's important that you guys let us know that that's like okay to feel. Like dissociation is really scary.
Absolutely.
And like I don't know if you guys know anything about that you can share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you. That was so brave. So thank you for that. And so dissociation is on a spectrum also. And the most severe form is when we don't know, like we forget about what's happening. So we compartmentalize. And the way that I see it is we have parts. And our parts or our internal family is not working together. And so we don't have an awareness of what's happening in the present moment. That's the most extreme. Some of you might be able to resonate with this example. Did you ever, or have you ever driven somewhere and you're like, how did I get there? Right, so that's kind of like the highway hypnosis, they call it. And so that's another form of dissociation. We all have it. Quite frankly, I wish that I could use that strategy, like if I'm in a painful, like dental, thing. But people do it when there's extreme trauma too. And so dissociation could be a symptom of PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder, can have various causes. And our agency, we do work a lot with folks who have, again, on the spectrum of post-traumatic stress. So I'm not sure if there was a question other than to explain a little bit about it, but you're right, it is a very serious symptom. It can be on an extreme. And for me, the way that I see it, it really is a part. It's a strategy to help protect against something. And so when we're working with folks on that, we try to figure out what is that part protecting? And a lot of times there's so much emotion down there that it's a way to shut it out, a way to shut it down. So if I'm feeling something extreme and it's not safe enough for me to express it in a place, then I learn to check out or go away. Does that feel, yeah. Anything else? That was really good question. She's going to bring the mic back to you.
What's the difference between paranoia and anxiety?
So paranoia would be a loss of reality, so I'm not present in the reality. And anxiety is just an extreme state that's impacted with, again, the parts of the brain. So tell me a little bit more about what, maybe do you have an example of something that you're curious about?
Like anxiety about being followed, or anxiety about like not being able to trust people. Like, is that considered paranoia, or is that just anxiety?
You know, what I would say is, you know, that would be something that a clinician can delve deeper in. My sort of off-the-cuff response would be, I hear a lot of people say, you know, I'm worried that somebody's following me, or it shows up in particular with folks who might have some separation anxiety. Something's going to happen to me. Something's going to happen to somebody that I love. And so what I would say is, you know, clinically, there's a lot of information that we would want to gather in a, you know, an assessment and getting to know the person who's experiencing that. But I would say that it wouldn't be uncommon that I would hear somebody who's experienced anxiety saying some of the things that you said, particularly the trust piece of it. And so, yeah, I would say that that could be anxiety. And, you know, since we're talking about anxiety and the spectrum, let's understand that, again, there's mild to, like, you know, I'm nervous about presenting, or I'm feeling anxious about presenting, to, you know, I might have, like, in the category of anxiety, there's separation anxiety, there's panic disorder, there is post-traumatic stress disorder. Those are all real things that people experience and fall on a different end of the spectrum, which is where we would talk about, you know, this is when we want to reach out for some help. Yeah. I think somebody in the back.
Well, first, thank you for bringing us this information and some coping tools, all very helpful. So I have a granddaughter, 19, in college, and she had anxiety and was hospitalized. I also have a next-door neighbor, a couple doors down, with a son about 22, and he was hospitalized with extreme anxiety. How do you recognize when somebody's going to need to be hospitalized, and what does that look like? And then what happens to them when they're in the hospital?
Sure. I'm going to kind of speak a little bit, I think, in generalities, because I think everyone's experience might be different. What I would say, a hospital admission is going to require somebody to be at risk for harming themselves or somebody else. So typically acute stays, which are, you know, short periods of time in a hospital, require that there's something going on that says, you know, I'm going to hurt myself because I'm feeling so bad, or I'm going to hurt somebody else because I'm feeling so bad. In the hospital, typically my experience is that it's about stabilization. So the acute units or the short-term stays are about stabilizing a person. So that might be developing coping skills. A lot of times there's medication management that goes along with that. There's groups that people participate in. One, so that, you know, again, you can learn coping skills, but also so that there is, like, I'm experiencing this and you're experiencing this. So there's a connection among, you know, folks within the hospital.
And one of the other things that's really important about the hospital stay is also that discharge planning and trying to figure out what resources that individual is going to need out in the community. And so while we're not doing overnight stays at our agency, you know, the hospitals then work with the outpatient mental health clinics and the professionals in the community so that that individual can be supported post-release. And that's a part of what happens during that stay, is to make sure that there is a discharge plan, that there is somebody who they can follow up with, and making sure that those appointments happen quickly. And so there's not a large gap in services once that stabilization happens.
But I do appreciate the things you're bringing up, which is that, you know, there's some really intense cases of anxiety that people can experience. And one of the things that we want folks, you know, here and on Facebook Live to know is it's okay to reach out. You know, what you're feeling is okay, in that you can get some support. And that it's not dramatic, that it is not you're crazy. It's I'm experiencing something either mind, body wise that I need some assistance with so that I can feel better. And we really want to drive that point home, that if it is feeling that bad, please reach out for support.
Absolutely.
I know we're a little after 8. We're getting bonus time right now.
Right.
2 questions I at least want to get to that were on Facebook. How do parents break barriers where the line of communication has been shut to start anxiety conversations with their children?
I think that it's different for every family, but simply being able to sometimes rebuild that bridge. Trust is really important when it comes to conversations, especially if the conversation has been shut down. And sometimes, it's just a matter of showing up and being able to ask those open-ended questions, to be able to create a space for those conversations. I go back to what Lisa said about the modeling, to be able to show that modeling to your children. And you will eventually get to a point where you're going to say, like, this is important for me to know that you're doing okay. I'm checking in with you. So it can't be about you. It needs to be about them. But sometimes it's okay to simply ask the questions.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. We're going to get you out of here. I'm really trying to.
This is why they're here,
I
right?
know.
Yeah.
I know. I could talk forever. To whoever wrote that, I would also say, we don't know your circumstance and appreciate your question, because I think we find a lot of parents in that situation where lines of communication have been broken, and it's a real challenge. It takes a lot of work to rebuild that. And so what I would say to folks who are working on that is be patient. Stay open to the conversation and let that person know that, you're in it for the long haul, even though it is really, really challenging to do so. And there are, like Beth Ann said, whether it's our agency or other agencies around that could support, in a family therapy setting.
And one of the things I think is important for us just to sort of own is that we make this all sound really easy. We make it sound like these conversations just flow. And it's certainly not. It's not an easy journey at all points. And so, our hope in tonight is that you're getting some ideas and some tools or some skills that you can try to implement that will work in your situation. But, Lisa said it sometimes takes a while and you have to be patient. And so just recognizing, and thank you for the question, that we know that sometimes when presentations like this happen, it makes it seem like, I can just go home and I'm going to be an anxiety expert. And it doesn't always happen that way.
Yeah. Mindfulness, I got it.
That's right.
This next one's kind of neat, because I didn't even think about it, but obviously everyone should. Are there foods or supplements that you would recommend to combat anxiety?
Oh, geez.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Well, everyone's different, right?
Yeah.
There is some research out there that, and I will be transparent. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this topic, but there is some research out there that shows that there are certain things that you can do, diet-wise that could help, and supplement-wise. I would leave that up to the doctors, because they are the ones who get paid the big bucks and know that stuff much better than I do. What I would say, though, to whoever wrote that question, and or anyone else listening, is, again, be mindful of what you're eating and how it impacts you, and just start to notice your diet. And so if you're noticing there are things like maybe drinking too much caffeine, or maybe, I know, like, there's, foods that have higher amounts of chocolate in it, those things just might increase anxiety or might get your heart rate going that feels like it's really an anxiety situation. So I would say doctors could probably be really helpful, and nutritionists in that. However, be mindful of what you're eating and how it is impacting your body.
We have one more, I think, on social media. Do we have time for one more?
That's it.
Are we okay?
Last one.
Last one on social media. Okay. How can teachers provide anxiety guidance to a group of students versus an individual student?
So I would say that doing group mindfulness activities. I know the social emotional learning is really important in schools, and a lot of the schools are doing some of that. They have different programs that each of them use. So I would say, for me, it would be really easy to just do a group exercise. It could be a 5 or 10 minute one. One of the things that when we were going into the schools that we did talk about is model for your students. I'm feeling a little bit anxious, or I'm feeling a little bit worried. Here's what happens in my body. And then to be able to describe, and then maybe open the conversation up to your students, or doing a mindfulness activity or a stretching. Oh gosh, the day is like, I could feel like there's so much tension, or we've got this test going. How about we all take a deep breath and we could collectively do something like that together.
And I think one of the things that we've heard from teachers is that when those types of activities are practiced, it opens the door to be able to have that individual conversation, because that teacher becomes that safe space. And so knowing that a student might not come to you right away, but in working with a teacher I was speaking with even last month, she said, we started doing some of these group activities and the kids are more willing to come and have those conversations. So using it as a tool to open up to the individual.
Well, ladies, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This was an
Thank
amazing
you.
night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Wonderful audience. Kathy and Lisa, thank you so much. Another special thank you to the Women and Girls Fund and to MCTV, Queens County Television, for hosting our evening, and Avalon for hosting our space.
Yes.
Please be safe going home.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
everybody.
everybody.
Have a great night.
Thank you.